the central question about ethics is whether or not we do have free will. Because if we don't, then we have to redefine it. We have to figure out, well, what does it mean then to act ethically?
And welcome back to another episode of Amir Approved. Today I'm actually super excited. We got two amazing guests today in the studio. The first guest is Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. Dr. Christopher DiCarlo is a philosopher, educator, and author. He often teaches in the Faculty of Philosophy at University of Toronto in Scarborough. He is also a lifetime member of the Humanists Canada and an expert advisor for the Centre for Inquiry of Canada. Thank you for coming on the show. And I got my good friend Cal. The reason actually why you guys are on here is Cal introduced me to Chris. Went to your workshop/seminar a couple of weeks ago. And it was intriguing because you were talking about do we have free will?
That's right.
And I was like, oh, right. Good conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Because long time Sam Harris fan, been listening to his work, reading his work for a long time. And the more I study philosophy, mythology, human behavior, evolutionary psychology, the more I lean on the side of we don't have free will.
Right.
The more data that I collect, I realize, even looking at my own behavior in the past, I'm like, well, fuck. It's like, okay, it makes sense to me. And so basically what I would love to talk to you about today is... maybe we can start on that topic. You know, what got you interested, first of all, in studying and analyzing, do we have free will or not?
Right, yeah. Well, ethics is one of my areas in philosophy. And to me, over the years, it really just came down to the central question about ethics is whether or not we do have free will. Because if we don't, then we have to redefine it. We have to figure out, well, what does it mean then to act ethically? Because all of ethics... and law, for that matter, is based on the presupposition that we have free will, that you could have chosen otherwise. Some people even refer to this as free won't. You know, I won't do that. You know, so it's always fascinated me to try to get that settled first. And since I really can't, I've seen no real compelling arguments, and certainly Dr. Carrier didn't convince me. In fact, he didn't even state anything that I could tell was an argument for the basis of compatibilism or that we have some kind of free will. I'm still waiting for somebody to demonstrate that to me. Daniel C. Dennett and I got into a bit of a row at the end of one of my talks out in BC, and he took up all the question and answer time after a talk I gave, and he tried to convince me that compatibilism works. I wasn't convinced, and now Dr. Carrier didn't convince me. So it's not as though I want hard determinism to be true. So the next book I'm writing will be based on a thought experiment. What if hard determinism is true? What would we have to then do in terms of saying, you should not have done that, or way to go, we give you praise for doing that, or the laws are such that, you know, we should be able to behave them in a particular way, and if you can't, then you need to be punished. We're going to have to redefine what it means to be a human being, because if it turns out that we aren't in control of our decisions and then our actions, then we have to redefine what it means to be good or bad, right? And so I don't think the world is ready for this yet. In fact, I think it's the single number one factor of why the humanities have gone to shit. Oh, can I swear? Is that cool? Okay. In academia. And it's because the postmodernists have kind of taken over the humanities in academia, and they're all about Marxism, free will. You can change yourself. You can be whomever you
think,
want.
though, Marxism is it's the opposite.
I know, but it's not. It's like, nope, you can be whomever you want. And I'll give you a quick example. When I was at one university and I was brought in to set up their critical thinking and ethics component, it was a social department or a criminology department. And I said, so what are you guys into here? Well, you know, Marxism, feminism. I said, that's cool. What about evolutionary theory? And I literally got this.
Really?
I got the hand. I don't do that. I said, what do you mean you don't do that? How can you not do that? How can you not incorporate that into your model of understanding human behavior? And then I said, let's just cut to the chase. Nurture, nature. Give me some numbers. 99 nurture, 1% nature. I said, you've got to be kidding me.
Wow.
How can you justify that? Oh, how can you justify nature? I said, oh, I don't know. Evidence? Data points? There's tons of it out there. Why aren't you reading this stuff? And so I was always looked upon as the anathema of the humanities. I want to bring the sciences in, and they want to kind of kick them out. At least the sciences that are inconvenient to their worldview or their particular philosophy, right?
You mentioned compatibilism. Can you define that?
Yeah, so there's three basic ways of looking at free will. There's the libertarians who believe we have absolutely all the free will in the world. Nothing is constrained. And these aren't the political libertarians, like Rand Paul and that type, or Ayn Rand. The libertarian means free. And so the libertarians they think they're totally free. Nothing influences what I decide. The flip side to that are the hard determinists. They believe no decision, no action a person makes is free whatsoever because every effect is preceded by a cause that is out of our control. Therefore, we have no real control over all of those causes. Therefore, we have no free will. Compatibilists bring the two together and say, you're right, the world is very much determined, but humans are still somehow able to make free choices within that context. And I'd like to believe that. And I think it's healthy for the world to think that that's true right now. But I'm not convinced that is true. And if it's not, I'm really worried a little bit about how the world is going to adapt to accepting hard determinism. Because some look at it as being bleak and without hope. And oddly enough, I find it liberating to find out that you're a machine destined to obey the orders of prior causes, to me, is a miraculous understanding in the development of human understanding.
What are some arguments from your perspective? Pretend I'm the devil's advocate over
right,
here.
Yeah, for
so I'm like, oh, no, we have complete free will. I can do whatever I want, and everything I say and I think, it just comes from me, and I'm special.
Right.
So convince me.
Well, yeah, of what is the will free is really what I would ask you. Mm-hmm. Of what is the will free? Because as soon as you say, oh, of all the prior causes, you've hung yourself on your own petard, you know what I mean? You've basically realized, no, I'm not free of that. Look at it this way. We now know that every one of us is made up of about 30 trillion cells that differentiate. Okay, they cause all kinds of different things. Skin, blood, everything. But we're made up of 40 trillion microbiota.
Yes.
So over half of what we are isn't us. It's bugs. It's little things that are doing their own thing within ecological niches within our bodies, over which what control do we have of that? And who are the we that controls that? If ever you want a great Star Trek metaphor, we are the Borg. Like our bodies are made up of systems, each acting interdependently amongst each other's system.
Well, we're more fungi than human.
Yeah.
So the largest organism on the planet is fungi.
Yeah. So if you think about free will, what is the me that is controlling or permeates through all of those systems? What is this ethereal, ghost-like substance? Now, if you're a dualist, if you believe we have souls, these immaterial things that survive bodily death and exist without any kind of material interference, then you just say, well, it's my soul. Like Men in Black. It's like that little alien inside the guy's head that steers the ship, right? So, okay, then what's the soul made of? And is it, does it have to basically comply to material cause and effect? Because if it doesn't, then what's going on? Then it behooves you then to then demonstrate to me how this soul-body thing actually interacts, this mind-body exchange thing actually interacts. And I've never seen anybody make a convincing case for that. And it's not as though I don't want them to. This next book is actually going to be a challenge for the world to prove hard determinism to be wrong.
You mentioned that understanding that free will doesn't exist is actually freeing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very difficult for a lot of people to understand. One of the things that I've often thought about is, even in myself when I realized I lost my cool in a situation or I handled a scenario not optimal, I can look back and say, you know what, I didn't get enough sleep, or maybe I was hungry, or maybe I just had too much on my mind. Mm-hmm. And I go back to think, what if you're working 80 hours a week, living in the slums, and you crack and you go off on somebody and then you're arrested? How much of that was you versus how much of that was all the causes that created that?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding what you said with regards to you're free and the world could actually be a better place, in the sense that I could look at these people that are in the penitentiary system and say, you know what, if their scenario was different,
Absolutely.
Well, it goes to
They wouldn't be there.
It goes to
Correct.
substrate, right? So you have your genetics, then you have epigenetics. So when we first, I want to say, coded or encoded the genome, right? And then was it late 90s, early 2000s, something like that. We thought at the beginning, it's like, oh, we hit the holy grail. One gene will does this, right? We're like, we can solve everything. Then I want to say quickly, but we soon realized, like, wait a second. Plants have more genes than humans. We don't have that many gene sets. And one gene doesn't do one thing. One gene does,
Yeah.
you name it, right? All depends on how you express yourself. You mentioned in India, in the ghettos in India, or you mentioned in prison.
right here in North America,
Or anywhere.
right?
It goes back to computer code and simulation. It's like depending on the substrate,
That's it.
depending on the environment, your free will or your behavior is completely different.
Well, it just goes back to that Keith Sutherland movie that we were just talking about,
Yeah.
where your memories are changed and your scenarios are changed at midnight, and then you wake up, completely different scenario, different person, different memories.
Yeah.
Do you behave differently? I mean, the thesis of that movie is 100%. You're a completely different person.
So then how are we to treat people in the future
Yes.
who can't comply to rules or laws that we make which go against their genetic, neuropsychological, all those,
Dispositions.
human biome influences? The law is going to have to be way more complex in trying to determine what is fair. How do we fairly treat a person who can't comply to the rules?
Well, somebody once told me that we don't have a justice system as much as we have a penal system.
Yeah,
correct.
And it's based on revenge. It's
Re-
based
retribution.
on
It's eye for an
an
eye.
eye for an
Yeah,
eye.
still.
And
Not everywhere, but still, yeah.
and where there's very little effort and energy to rehabilitate, to help people come back into society.
Yeah, it's called restorative justice.
Yeah, and we don't have that here in North America.
Because big business, my friend. It's $400 a day for inmates. That you
Yeah.
make. You have private prisons in the United States or on the stock market.
And you have them in cahoots with judges who are deliberately filling those.
Yes.
Like we already know that this stuff goes on,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, there's a case where a judge was sentenced himself because he was putting kids to
Yeah.
Heard about that, yeah.
not too long ago.
Yeah,
That
I think
was-
John Oliver covered that on one of his shows.
Yeah.
Well, luckily, we don't live in the States. Who was it? Bill Clinton that put in the 3-strike law?
What a ridiculous thing.
That's the most fucked up law
What
possible.
a
was the Clintons,
ridiculous
yes.
thing.
It was.
What are you thinking, Billy? Just not a good idea.
I don't know who persuaded him or...
Yeah.
Like, there's no-
that's on par with just say no. Like that's pretty close
There's like
to
literally
just say
no,
no.
second order thinking there
Yeah,
whatsoever. It's
I
like
know.
no thinking allowed. It's like, yeah, sure. If you 3 strikes for whatever, you're going...
And he's a
And
bright
that third
guy.
strike could be
It could be
minor.
anything.
It could be minor.
Probation, most of the time is probation
Yeah,
issues.
it's breaches.
And exactly.
That's what it is.
Exactly.
And you're dealing with people who have a hard time living by a schedule to begin with, and you expect them to behave a certain way on their
Or
own
they have mental
accord.
health issues or whatever. I mean, it gets so complicated, right? That-
Can one argue that we all have mental health issues, some of us more severe than others?
to a degree, right? If you define mental health as being extremely broad, then for sure. I'm Aspie. I don't know what your situation is, but yeah.
I just
we
look
all-
at it as like, what is optimal mental health?
Mm-hmm.
And am I living by my optimal mental health? Well, 9 times out of the 10, I'm not. 9
Mm-hmm.
times, like as an entrepreneur or somebody in any field that's working hard, if you're not getting your 7.5, 8 hours of sleep, then you're not optimal. And if you're
Correct.
not optimal, then your mental health is suboptimal.
Mm-hmm.
And we could say that we're in a society with a whole bunch of
this
people
is a taboo
living suboptimal.
This is a taboo subject I bring up. But we talk about free will, but then we look at, for example, sex predators,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's for kids or whatever. It's like, I'm not in that industry. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychotherapist, but from a person looking at it from an outside perspective, I would say that person has zero choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not like he's like, oh, I choose to do this most vitriol, evil manifestation of an act possible.
Because why aren't we choosing that?
Law and
right?
Order did an amazing episode of this years
Oh,
ago
yeah?
where a young female teacher eventually, cheated on her husband or family, had sex with one of the students who's well underage.
Yeah.
And as she was being tried through courts, they discovered she had like some type of seizure. They discovered that there was a tumor in her brain, and it was the tumor that was causing certain inhibitions. And they removed the tumor, and she was fine. And there was a restraining order. She couldn't communicate with the student again. But eventually, she relapsed, and she communicated with the student again, and only to find out that the tumor had grown again.
So that's
it's like,
taken
what
from
do
a
you
real
do?
life story, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a real
Probably.
case. It is.
It is.
I
Okay.
can tell. I can show you the case of the guy.
Wow.
He was an upstanding, Christian, Bible school kind of guy.
Yeah.
Started liking the little boys.
Yeah.
Got caught while in prison, has a seizure, MRI, walnut-sized tumor, gets it removed. Those feelings are gone. Judge dismisses the case.
Holy shit.
It grows back. But now he tells his wife, why am I feeling this way again? Off to the hospital, MRI, it's grown back. They cut it out for good. Those feelings are gone. So that's a clear case.
So and that's the point, right? I mean, we're talking about free will. Like, how many people in the penitentiary system don't need to be there had their
Exactly.
circumstances been different, had they grown up
sure.
in a different environment,
Absolutely.
had they had different parents?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in the future, we're going to have to look at what I call the relations of systems or relational systemics, which is to understand the relationships, the complex web and interplay of so many different systems in the world, from law to health to biochemistry to the environment. There's so many interacting systems. How are we going to be able to truly treat people fairly by trying to consider all of those factors, all of those causal elements that led to that one effect that caused the person to pull the trigger or hold the person up or rape the person or whatever, and then to be able to treat them fairly accordingly. Like, we don't want to allow people to do whatever they want. And this is my great fear. Once people start to understand that hard determinism might be true, we're going to become
It's like a get out of jail free
we're going to
card.
become a victim society. Everything's going to be blame it on my ADD, blame it on this, blame it on sorry, I couldn't help it, And so we got to quickly get through that hiccup in the revolution of understanding human behavior and quickly educate people to say, no, you can no longer justify bad actions simply because you think you're no longer accountable. You are accountable insofar as you should be able to know what the norms are or the laws are, gauge your behavior currently according to those, and if they don't match those for whatever reason, then the obligation befalls you as the broken machine to get help, to go to somebody to say, why is it that I can't comply with this? Why do I want to continuously do crystal meth? What's going on with me, right? And I don't want to be this person, but I really like the drug. And, where do we then put the blame, and then how do we help that person?
Yeah, that's a challenge in itself. I mean, you have people who, for example, alcoholics, their families come together and say, "Hey, you have a problem," but if they're not willing to
Exactly.
take that information and accept that they are perhaps deviant from what the norm is,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of a lot to ask for from someone who's clearly not well.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the challenge. How do you
Yeah.
how do you instill that into someone to say, I think the machine is broken? And if you need a certain amount of a certain amount of the machine to work for
You
it to be
do.
able to say
You can't
it's not
instill-
working.
Yep.
Or you can't force anybody to do anything they don't want to do. If you look at the most successful AA groups, they're not all successful. There's only certain ones.
Oh, and in fact, they've done more harm in some cases.
Enablers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's
Really?
certain.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to. I'm a firm believer that as long as we are relying on human biases, we're not going to make exponential progress because there's too much self-interest. Whether that is safety of X corporation, safety of profits, or safety of positioning, there's so many biases. I think you mentioned this in your talk last time, where we're going to have to incorporate the data that we have from evolutionary psychology and biology, sociology, anthropology, and then put that within at least some type of AI. Right?
Yep.
That's
I
the
do.
only way I see making rational, logical, purely data point driven decisions.
Yeah. And in the end, we can still dispute what the machine says.
Yes.
There's no way the machine's going to run the show for us. We get the final call.
Correct.
But we need the machine to work out the messy stuff that humans are bad at, that humans are overly biased and can't think straightly over. That's what I want to bring the machine in for, that kind of purity of, data points that we can then rely on from a responsibly and reliably attained database. Because otherwise, human bias creeps in, political agendas take over,
Yes.
and we're back to the same old problems.
Well, that's what Ray Dalio did, right?
Kind of, right?
With regards to
He
trading decisions.
made a negative feedback, like taped a lot of his conversations, data points of his decision making. So he built this big data pool, and based on this data pool, was able to kind of figure out patterns that you
Right.
can kind of extrapolate from that.
But sometimes you'd agree with the machine, and sometimes you would
Correct.
disagree. But
Yes.
you'd
Yep.
use it as a tool.
That's it, an
This
instrument.
is a good segue to your project.
Right, the Oztalk project.
That's right.
Yeah, so I've been trying to get financing and trying to meet with various politicians, especially Trudeau when he first got in. I think it would be very helpful to the Senate in trying to make decisions about important policies because it's nonpartisan. It would be just a helpful aid in trying to speed up
I think the audience,
Missions.
if the audience can figure out what is it first?
the Oztalk.
Yeah.
Oh, onion skin theory of knowledge is
Onion skin.
OSTO.
Okay.
So you have to imagine all of these varying systems, from the physical sciences to the cultural aspects, meshing together all of these various forms of systems so that we can better understand, for an example, what do we do with the pipeline situation in Canada? BC shut Alberta down. Canada federally tried to intervene. We ended up buying the thing for $4.3 billion or whatever. So Canada, us, we now all own this pipeline. Why did it get shut down? Because the BC residents said, no, we're green, we're all about green, and we care about Aboriginal rights, and you're not putting this stuff through here and whatnot. What a machine would be able to cut through is all the political ideology and realistically look at, well, what are you humans basing your economy, your transportation, all of your other varying systems, what do they depend on? We're still very much a crude oil-based energy system right now. That's not great, but it is what it is. And so what we have to do is, if we want to move away from a fossil fuel industry, that's cool, but it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, look at the technology we're using right now. This is probably the result of oil burners.
This is oil. This is
Yeah.
oil. This is oil.
Yeah.
That's oil. This is oil.
It's all around us.
Yeah.
So the move has to be more gradual, because if you try to do it too quickly, you're going to lose a lot of jobs. You're going to
I
upset
sat down
a
with
lot
an
of things.
environmentalist talking about this. I'm like, let's say for a moment I agree 100% with you, which I don't. Right? Both sides have their points.
Yes.
Right?
But you can't do it overnight.
No.
That was my debate. I'm like, what you're saying, literally, imagine you are in their shoes in Alberta or these places where you have millions of jobs that rely on the oil industry, right? That means family to provide roof over their head, food on the table, support for the family. So what you're saying, based on your extremist point of view, is like, fuck all those guys. We're gonna take whatever 2 to 5 million people out of work, and like, I don't care. The environment's better. Do you hear yourself talk?
Well, the other part of that is that a pipeline may be better for the environment than trucks going
Yeah,
back
oh,
and
This
forth.
is what I never understood. I'm like,
There's no question.
This is the part
Yeah.
that really is interestingly
Yeah.
naive about people who are against a pipeline.
We should be able to ask the Oztalk,
Yes.
of all the ways to transport oil, historically, what's been the best? And by best, then we can define what we mean by best. Best for human rights, best for the environment, best for screwing up ecosystems, best for not killing people like in Lac Megantic. You know what I mean? What's the best overall? And dollars to donuts, it's probably going to come back with pipeline,
Yeah.
because they are the least invasive. And the way pipelines are designed now, they do leak less, right? They are double insulated, right? You can do it right, or at least you can do it better.
Yeah.
And if it's an Aboriginal issue, that's fine. Then we should be able to work with Aboriginal peoples to make it worth their while that we're going to truck this stuff across their land, right? Like, oil makes a lot of money, so there should be a piece of the pie for everybody in this, right? So for some reason, Richard Harris wrote on his blog that I wanted to have senators program the Ostalk. I don't know where he got that. Like, it's just.
I don't
like,
think so. They
was
know
he
one
even
line of
listening?
code.
Right? So, no, we can't have that. Because I'm anticipating your next question. Who gets to program the machine,
Yeah.
right? Because really, I got to go with Pinker on this. We have to find better angels of our nature. And they do exist. They do exist. And those better angels of our nature are by definition machines that have been least corrupted by their own selves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that don't have the tumors. They're the ones who don't have any particular political affiliation.
What's the saying? Absolute power corrupts
Yeah.
absolutely all.
They're the ones who will be like Socrates, who said, when you enter into social service, you enter with the clothes on your back. That's it. We'll pay for your house and your food. We'll take care of your family. But you can't be given more because you're working for the polis. You're working for the mass of us.
Yes.
So the clothes on your back, that's what you enter office into, and that's what you will leave office with.
Yeah.
That's it. You can't stand to gain anything.
Well, I believe in ancient Greece, to have a life of politics was something sacred, something that you would,
very much.
because you were sacrificing, you were a
Yes.
servant of the people, where it's the complete opposite now.
Yeah, it's lobbying and it's money, right? And it's vested interest. So
John Oliver did I watched just last night, the weekend review or something like that about the homelessness issue in
San Fran?
California
Yeah.
and how much it's costing to put up like these temporary homes. Something that would take maybe $10,000 to $15,000 is costing the states like $400,000 or $500,000 per unit.
Wow.
It just doesn't make sense. Like, what are
Yeah.
these units coming with?
San Fran
it's
just
wild.
All of Cali just dug
There's
themselves-
way too many middlemen.
Oh, yeah.
or
they
middle
just
people.
they just impose rent control. They're done, man. California is a sinking ship. They have so many political issues. I don't even know where to begin. That's why you have an exodus of people from Cali going to Texas.
they are
Yeah.
going to Texas.
Yeah,
you know
that's
why?
right.
The taxes are
No income tax.
so much less.
Tim Ferriss did that a few years back.
Well, moved to Austin.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah. I love Austin. Love
You
it.
like it, eh?
Oh, it's one of my favorite cities in the
Yeah.
States. Yeah.
Property's cheap compared to Toronto.
Yeah. And the people are cool, man.
Yeah.
Austin is this weird little haven inside of a larger, more right wing, place to be. It's pretty left and it's pretty cool.
Well, let me ask you this: where do you see, like, based on your background and expertise and the knowledge you've attained, where do you see politics going? Like, are we like? My issue with this is I don't ever see governments sanctioning or putting this in.
Putting what in?
An Ostalk?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to see a rise of the independents. Like I think we're seeing a trend towards the end of party politics because that really screws everything
Yeah.
up, especially in Canada. If you become a liberal, like look at, this is going to sound weird, but when Trudeau took over, Justin, he said to his caucus, every one of you has to be pro-choice. Every one of you, because that's what we stand for. I gave a eulogy at Henry Morgenthaler's funeral. So we were buds. We were tight. And he was responsible for making abortions legal in Canada. He went to prison 3 times. His funds were shut down and whatnot. He sacrificed his medical career for the benefit of women's rights to be able to have safe and effective abortions. Yet, I'm still of the mind that a person, even within a caucus like the Liberal Party, maybe for whatever reason they're Catholic, or you know what I mean, and they're not thrilled about the idea of abortion. Should they then have to have their own personal philosophical and religious views overridden by political ideology, or do we want to get rid of the party line so that because they're so divisive, you must be this or you must be that? And look at what it's doing down south, right? If we get rid of the concept of party politics and we put in the independents, who are simply for the good of the polis, then a good idea is a good idea, and it doesn't matter where it comes from or who said it. It can be based on what the machine gives us for the benefit of humanity and all of humanity. And so less vested interest cuts down on the lobbying. So the independents enter in with the clothes on their back, and they're social servants. They are servants of society. And we get back to that kind of Greek notion of what was known as the golden age of politics, where people listened to argumentation. And if they were convinced, they would surrender what they have now come to realize was a bad argument.
I think the only way we're going to see that is I actually posted on Facebook a couple of days ago, and I've been studying it more and more, is back to city-states.
Yeah.
So you don't have it's not like Canada disappears as a nation state. That stays a whole. City-states still pay a small tax towards the nation for military and general services for everybody, a benefit, like protect their borders. I'm not one of these naive people say borders don't exist. I'm like, you guys must be crazy.
Yeah, right.
Borders exist in nature. They're there for a reason. But for me, it's like when you create city-states, you create game theoretical models.
Right.
Right, so it's like Toronto can make their own rules, their own policies. We can use our own machine learning system if we want. If Edmonton doesn't want to do it, it's their loss. I really don't care. Right?
Or their gain, right?
Or their game. I don't know. Exactly.
We'll see, right?
Yeah,
we'll see. We have way more diversity in terms of thoughts, ideas, and
The crazy thing is, though, this isn't a crazy idea anymore. So two interesting things happened. One, where Ford got voted in as premier and people went crazy. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of members of the city hall in Toronto were talking about city-state Toronto because we don't have to follow. And then they voted in, and I never did studies on if this is good or bad, but just giving an example. They voted in to have toll booths on the DVP.
Yeah.
And then the Ontario province came in and said no. I have no idea if this is good or bad for Torontonians. But once again, they brought up the conversation of like, well, why can't we have our toll booths? We voted it in. Like, we're the ones, we're paying tax. We're the city council. I don't get it. And so at that point, they're like, more conversations about city-states. I don't know if it's going to happen in our lifetime. I have no idea. But I see the tides are slowly, the narrative's kind of picking up.
Right.
Yeah.
you think it's going to be a smooth transition, or you think it's going to get worse?
I don't think so.
first?
There's ever a smooth transition. But the cool thing about Canada, city-states already exist in Canada. People just don't realize it. There are city-states in Canada.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
Aboriginal land.
Ah, fair enough.
They're city-states.
They are.
They have their own rules, their own police, own policy, all taxation codes.
Oh,
Interesting.
a lot of autonomy for sure. Yeah.
They're a city-state. There is a charter and legislation that we can follow that already exists in Canada, so we don't have to reinvent anything.
Right.
We're like, oh, just copy what they're doing.
Hey, there's a hot button issue. Let's talk about Aboriginal.
Sure, let's go for it. That's a good segue.
Because I've always wanted to be on record
Sure.
about this.
Didn't you get in trouble enough with regards to that? I mean,
I'm
this is one of
done.
my first
I've got
stories I
nowhere
heard.
to go but up at this point.
That's a good place to go up.
Okay, I've got nowhere to go but up. When I was on tour for a magazine article I wrote called "We Are All African," and I was heading across Canada, one of the organizations in Saskatoon took me to a reservation, and there was a museum there, and I got to see authentic artifacts, that were about 8,000 to 10,000 years old, like the real McCoy, and talked with the curator and whatnot. It was a place. It was like buffalo smashing head. It's where they charge the buffaloes off the cliff.
Yeah.
It's that place near Saskatoon. So they took me to it, and they actually put boulders like this, to cause them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very clever way of hunting and gaining a lot of resources very quickly, right? And you could see the skeletons and everything that they had dug up over time and whatnot. And so as the curator showing me all this, I said, tell me, do you believe your ancestors were always on this land? And she says, yes. And I said, but we have scientific evidence that they clearly weren't. And she kept saying, yes, many stories. I said, no, not many stories. There's many mythologies.
Yes.
But there's one scientific way of understanding the truth. Another story. No, it's not another story. It's the truth. Your ancestors, my ancestors, were cousins, very close, if we just go back 25,000 years, which is a blink in evolutionary history. Your people largely, more than likely, came across the Bering Strait 15,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, migrated down through the Americas, settled, and so on. Once the last glacial maximum retreated, the last ice age, 10,000 years ago or so, your people your ancestors were continent locked. My ancestors over in Europe couldn't, we didn't have the technology at that point, but we were still developing our culture over in Europe differently from how your ancestors were. You guys were largely still using stone tools and whatnot, like we were at that time. But as we know, how the rapid advance of culture developed in other parts of the world, agriculture, right, agrarian societies and that kind of thing, that really pushed the envelope. Agriculture changed everything forever.
Yeah.
And so as more and more jobs became specialized, technology just took off. Like it just goes off the charts. And so we developed, seafaring abilities, and we're able to now meet our cousins many years later. You guys were already here and locked here because water prevented us from walking across land bridges anymore or sailing along an ice bridge from Europe to Newfoundland. So once that was all gone, you still stayed largely the same way with stone tools and migratory patterns and following herds and all that kind of stuff. We didn't. Now, when we meet you, how do we divide up the land? What's fair? You were here for 14,000 years. We weren't. We were doing our thing over in Europe or wherever. Now we come across, and there's a huge chunk of land here, and there's not a lot of you folks. There's a lot of different tribes everywhere, all throughout the Americas. But now what's fair in terms of who gets what? And if we're talking about reparations, based on what my ancestors did to your ancestors, is there a break-even point? Do we know what a break-even point would even look like? When have we repaired the damage my ancestors have done through whatever reasons, largely through microbiology, largely just killing you because your immune system had no connection to ours, that had gone through plague after plague after plague and developed very robust immune systems, so that as soon as we come over and shake hands with you guys, we're passing on TB and pleurisy and diphtheria and everything that your microbiomes are not familiar with. So we're wiping out 90% of you guys. How do we repair that? And when do we know when we've done a fair and equitable job of repairing what we did to essentially you, our cousins? So I want to treat Aboriginal situations throughout the Americas as though it's true, as though you were our cousins, and we split up for a while. This is known as allopatric speciation. And we just split up. Something caused us to split up. And then you evolved differently and we evolved differently. And then we eventually came together again. We have to start with the truth, because otherwise laws and policies and whatnot get created as though they have always been here. That is, it is their land. They grew from the land. Well, that's just scientifically, factually wrong. And the most difficult thing I've been able to try to get in this conversation is people to agree that we were all African at one point and that we all speciated the planet. And when we did that, and when we can admit to that, what now becomes fair? Because they're related to us. They have to be related to us. They're not different, right? They change in terms of habits and culture, but they're not different in any physical way that we can tell. So by my saying, and the tour was the We Are All African tour, she kept saying, the curator of this museum, more stories. Like, she would not let this narrative, you just have a different narrative. And maybe yours is right and maybe it's wrong. And I'm trying to say, no, the scientific view is correct. To the best of our knowledge, the evidence all points in the direction that there is a diaspora out of Africa that populated the world. Why can't we start there and then now talk about fairness based on that model, that we are all from the same place? And because if we don't, you see the trouble we're going to get into, right? Whom do we respect? Which mythology of which tribe at which point on which geographical
it's easy
area?
for everybody to claim their own holy land, right?
So how do you respect all of
This
that?
is the problem with mythology and narratives, and Joseph Campbell talks about this.
Oh, I know Joseph, yeah.
And he's like, there's nothing wrong with mythology. That's mythology is the strongest magic we have as human beings. The problem is mythology does not update itself to the context of where you're living. That's the problem, you know. Out of him studying all the mythologies and him talking to all different people of all different religions, like, you guys are all right, Your biggest problem, regardless of who you are, where you're from, is you're not updating any of your mythology to correspond with today. That's the
right.
problem. And it's just going to get exponentially worse with technology.
It is.
Like exponentially worse.
So what's fair, right?
Yeah.
How do we, like, I'm not saying we're going to solve this here, but isn't that what should begin all conversations about reparations of all peoples, whether it's Black Americans who have been suffered under slavery, whether it's Jews, right, who have suffered under oppression? Like, how do we figure this stuff out? Can we get back? Can we all agree that we all came from the same place? Because if we can't, why? Why are we going against the science on this? And do you have a right to tell me that my narrative is just another narrative, that I could just as likely be wrong? I can't do that. My tongue would leap off its roller. You know what I mean? I need to believe in evidence-based information. And right now, the best information we have, based on our genetics, based on, migration patterns, fossil evidence, tool use, art, everything, we all came out of Africa. There's no question we speciated there.
Yeah,
we might have come out and gone back and come out and gone back.
It was Eve, the oldest bones.
Yeah,
Mitochondrial DNA.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we have overwhelming evidence that we are all
And
African.
we migrated. It wasn't. This was after the supercontinent. It wasn't during.
Oh yeah. This
Yeah.
was we speciated about 200,000 years ago into Homo sapiens sapiens, and then we started leaving Africa around 60,000 years ago. Now Neanderthal left 300,000. They
Yeah.
left way before us, and they lasted up to about 30,000 years ago.
I have a joke about migration from Africa because you got to think about it. It's nice, warm. You know what I mean? Beautiful on the eyes, aesthetics. And you go to Europe, it's fucking freezing cold. Then I'm like,
Yeah.
imagine I'm thinking in their mind, we're bipedal or walking.
Yeah.
We're still hunting and gathering. So there's two things I look at. I'm like, okay, so we're following food sources. And some shit hit the fan where we were. We had to leave. Maybe
Yeah.
two birds and one stone.
Yeah.
And imagine we're walking and Africa, then Morocco,
Yeah.
and going up to Europe, and you see snow. I'd be like, hey boys, we made a fucking horrible mistake. Horrible. Turn back.
Send it down the line.
Are you familiar with
Turn back.
Roskos, the hip hop artist?
Roscos? No.
Roskos. He's a pretty good, deep hip hop artist. He's old school.
Roskos, okay.
He had a song called "Nature of the Threat."
Okay.
If you listen to it in today's world, you'd believe it's pretty racist towards white people.
Sure.
And one of the big premises in that song, and it's like he starts off in Africa and he
Yeah.
talks about human evolution and human anthropology from Africa all the way to
Okay.
recent times. This is like the year 1999, 2000. And he says that one of his theories, and he quotes people, is that the first Africans to leave Africa were albinos. They were somehow mutants of the darker skinned people, and it was the first case of racism towards white people, and they were pushed out into colder climates. I don't remember where the quote actually comes from, that he's sourcing it from, but that is one of many theories.
And to address what you said about the Neanderthals, don't forget there's been several ice ages,
Yes.
like 5 that we know of,
Yes.
that have come and gone over the last 2 million years. So maybe they had gotten there and were there when it descended on them. And it's like, we're here. You know what I mean? And they just kind of stuck it out until it left again, and then another one came back. So
Well,
there were a lot of
Well, you
fluctuations
said a
in weather.
fascinating thing. Like I was down in, I spent a lot of time in Mexico, down in the Yucatan Peninsula.
Oh yeah,
So, where the Mayan Riviera is.
I know. Yeah.
And so we did a tour there too, talking to some local Mayans. And they did their genetic mapping. And their closest related cousins are Mongolians.
Ah, very good. Very interesting.
All right, so they're looking at also, passing, what was it called, the ice bridge up there.
That's right.
And they went
Through
all
the
way-
Bering Strait. Yeah.
Bering Strait all the way down south into
Yeah, just kept pushing south.
modern day, Mexico,
Yeah.
Guatemala, etc. Yeah,
I spent a bit of time in Guatemala.
nice.
Yeah, I got to know some people, learned a bit about Mayan culture.
It was
Yeah.
interesting.
It is. It is. And interesting you mentioned the Yucatan. That's literally where, the meteor hit that wiped
Yes.
out all the dinosaurs
Yeah.
about 65 million years ago. Like, that's what gave mammals our shot, right? I mean,
Yes.
had that not happened, who knows how the world would have evolved. And, what survived was something called Plesiodapsus. It was this ground squirrel mammal that then gave rise to all the primates, the old world monkeys, the new world monkeys, and whatnot.
Do you think God wanted that comic to hit?
I don't know. Like for me, did you read Nick Bostrom's simulation theory?
So, yeah, Nick and I have
Because
talked a
that
bit
kind of
online.
lines in with the free will stuff. Too.
Yeah.
Like the fact of like, if I'm computer code, it's not free will. I'm coded.
Yeah. That's right.
Right. So it's interesting. But I also have a theory though, if we are computer code, then there's room for viruses and glitches. So like anomaly. Like some kind of-
Anomalies. Neo. I just watched it again.
Yeah.
yeah, the first one?
Matrix, 1999.
I like-
20 years old.
But I like Leonard Hofstadter's comment on this, and that is, if Bostrom is correct, why did some alien pay for the upgrade of his glasses and inhaler?
Hofstadter.
Leonard in Big Bang Theory.
Ah, okay, yeah.
So I think Sheldon mentions the holographic concept.
You know
right?
David Hofstadter,
Yeah, that sounds very
a
familiar.
mathematician,
Yeah.
math. His book is crazy. It's hard for me to even grasp, but his book is Gödel, Escher, Bach.
Yeah.
And all the fractals.
Yeah.
You got to read that book.
What is it called?
Gödel, Escher, Bach.
That's Douglas, right? Douglas Hofstadter.
No, it's David. I think it's David Hofstadter. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
Let's
it
go
is
to
Douglas.
Google. Get
Go to
your
Google.
staff.
Here,
I'm gonna say
I'll do it.
Douglas.
Check it up. Gödel, Escher, Bach. G-U-D-E-L, Escher.
G-O-
G-O, yeah.
G-O-E.
Is it Douglas or David?
G-O.
E-D-E-L, comma, Escher, E-S-C-H-E-R, and Bach.
It's a
It
thick book. It's
is-
like that.
It is thick.
Yeah. I find the YouTube lectures a little bit
Douglas.
more- Douglas, you're right, yeah.
Because he did The Mind's Eye, right?
Yeah.
With Dan Dennett, with Daniel C. Dennett.
But that book is a mindfuck.
What is it about?
Oh. It's about everything.
Exploring common themes in the lives and works of logician Kurt.
It's
Kurt Gödel.
It's fractals to summarize. Repetition, repetition, repetition. But yeah, it ties in quite well with simulation theory and computer coding.
Oh, yeah. Which I don't know if that's ever going to be testable, right? Like right now, it's just a nice fanciful hypothesis, but it'd be nice if we could figure out.
I'm a more a practical person. The biggest problem we have, so you mentioned like what is fair? And you mentioned politics. For me, these are all massive open-ended problems that aren't really tangible. There's a good saying from the biologist Gall, and Gall states, it's called Gall's law. It states no complex organism ever evolved from another complex organism. Single cellular organism, multicellular, so forth. Right? There's a kind of a lineage.
Right.
And speed can happen like this, but it's not all of a sudden here's a single cell, now there's a human.
Right.
Right? It doesn't happen like this.
Unless you're a creationist.
Yeah, there you go. Right, dinosaurs don't exist, etc. However, when we're looking at problems, and this is why I always my head hurts when I'm either talking to crazy environmentalists or anybody extremist. I'm like, I actually don't even know what you're saying. I have no idea what you're saying. Can you like explain to me like one problem that I can change? Like, I have a friend of mine that believes in all like conspiracies, right?
We've all got one.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, the Earth is flat. I'm like, okay, I'll play around with no.
I was hoping we would eventually get to that, but
I'll play with you. I'll play with you. Okay.
he actually believes this.
Yeah, I'll play with you. I'm like, sure, it's flat. How does that change how I behave on a day-to-day basis? Because that's what I care about the most.
Right.
Like, does that mean that I change my behavior to me? Does that mean that I change how I live with my family, with my friends? The answer is no. Okay, the Earth's flat. Yippee-ki-yay. I'm not really changing anything. Aliens exist. So what? Am I changing? Does that data help me somehow? Can I
Right.
use this data?
Okay.
Like, say you and I are computer programmer. I can't use this data. I can't do anything about it. And so when I like to approach problems is like, as an individual, there's things that we can do. There is data that can help us. So if we know for a fact that it's not binary that, Cal, Chris, or Amir behave X. It's not that binary. There's like a bell curve, right? There's a spectrum of how we behave. So yes, we don't necessarily have free will, but there's a spectrum of how we behave. within this bell curve, right? Based on our substrate, based on your upbringings, based on your genetics, epigenetics, values,
The whole
context,
ball, the
ball,
whole onion skin theory.
which is powerful. Because if you know how you're programmed, you can create proper systems. Now, these systems are things that we can manipulate and control.
Correct.
This is where I like to focus attention on. So it's like, how can we as individuals create proper systems? Like, how can we incorporate knowledge from evolutionary psychology, cognitive science, and how can we do stuff on a day-to-day basis to better know ourselves and better create proper, let's say, even like a simple heuristic, like a checklist to go by. It's Let's just follow this stupid checklist to kind of make better decisions as human beings. This is stuff that we should focus more as people, as opposed to like these obscene thoughts where it's like it's cool to talk about, but in reality, like, what can Cal do about it?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
Nothing really.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Well, yeah, that breaks down.
Is that going to change my diet?
Yeah.
Am I going to go to the gym more?
Right.
I don't
Yeah, I
know.
don't know. Yeah.
It does break the problems down into the theoretical and the practical, right? So knowing whether or not Higgs boson actually exists isn't going to change the fact that I missed my bus to work or whatnot. But it does tell us a little bit more about the universe.
Yes.
Right? So I like keeping the theoretical and the practical as fairly distinct. And
Have you seen the documentary Particle Fever?
No.
Oh, so good.
Is it?
So good. It's
about the Large Hadron?
that's
Yeah?
right.
Okay.
That's right. Going into the test, and it examines the theorists and the what do they call? There's the theorists and then
Practical
That's right.
physicists. Yeah.
and the people who actually test it. Really, really interesting documentary, worth watching. Yeah.
That's literally the difference between Sheldon Cooper and Leonard Hofstadter. Sheldon's just theoretical, and Leonard's trying to construct experiments that would confirm or falsify what Leonard.
Theorist experimentalist.
Sheldon thinks.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something really interesting that I've been struggling, or at least thinking about a lot lately, which is there's a certain range of behavior, a range of thinking
Sure.
that you will adhere to, that I will, that Chris will, and it's very difficult to deviate unless there's like psychedelics involved or something extraordinary,
Sure.
an extraordinary event that happens in my life that kind of opens me up. That said, with this kind of limited range, and this goes back to the book, The
Drunkard's Walk.
Drunkard's Walk that you're mentioning. If you were to think that there's an infinite amount of possibilities, right? I can get up after this podcast and there's a ton of things that I could do, but I won't. I'm not going to do that.
Sure.
Out of the infinite possibilities, I'm going to do probably a very narrow bandwidth of things. I'm going to go home, eat dinner with my family, get ready for work tomorrow. How can we better navigate the universe to kind of maximize that potentiality of anything can happen? And this goes back to the idea of decision making. If you could make 5 or 10, 15 consecutive, almost optimal decisions, you can go from here to almost anywhere in the universe. Like, by universe, I mean like realities,
Sure.
the possibilities. How do we break out of this almost mental prison that we're in, that I have only a certain amount of ideas and thoughts based on my genetics, based on my upbringing, but there's so much more that exists, but I'm kind of limited to my own ideas. How do I break out of this so that I can have extraordinary results, that I can, a year from now, 10x my life, 100x my life, or 1,000x the purpose, or solve this challenge? Like, how do you break out of this?
I think the biggest problem is
This is the anomaly of the Neo and the Matrix.
Yeah.
How do you see the Matrix and say, shit, if I make a left turn here, a right turn here, and go straight down this path, I'm going to get a completely different
it
result.
could be that granular, but the issue, what you're asking the question is, I think people really need to pause and audit their life. That's the biggest thing. So it's like in business, we want to improve something, we track our stats. We track our top line revenue, profits, burn, etc.
Right.
What you don't measure, you can't really improve.
Right.
And we rarely do it for our individual lives. And we rarely pause and kind of do our own like OKRs and KPIs of an individual, right? Chris Inc., Cal Inc. And so it's like, you want to improve something in your life is like, when do you actually rip apart what you do? I'm a firm believer. I have this I don't say thesis, but I call it the individual constitution. Same thing like, Canada, United States, you have this national constitution. It states certain laws and let's say, principles. What are your constitutional principles as an individual? What do you stand by? What do you care about? What's your morals? What's your ethics? And based on your own individual constitution, you can then kind of craft your lifestyle. I think a lot of times where people are depressed or people are trying to look for optimization is they're trying to base their happiness on what people expect them to do, or they're trying to mirror what other people are trying to do, based on like Rene Girard's medic theories. It's like, even like us in like an entrepreneurism, I have to make 100 million. Like I got to follow everybody because it's the path, right? Monkey see, monkey do, mirror neurons.
So similar to Chomsky's manufactured consent.
Correct. And so for me, I'm like, this is why meditation's so powerful, but it takes a long time for you to kind of benefit from it. I want to say benefit, but to really understand the beneficial aspects of meditation. And why psychedelics are interesting kind of just hits you, but that's not for everybody.
Right.
Maybe it should be.
It depends, right? For me, it's like, it's just auditing. I rarely find people who really do audit their life. Like really, and like, for example, a lot of people come to a conclusion like they don't need this type of lifestyle. They just don't. One of my theories in our lifetime is I believe we're going to have an exodus of people leaving the city. I think they're going to opt out and be like, I'm out of this.
Get in a cabin in the woods.
That I would say that would be based on a big assumption that there's a lot of more people coming into their own light, being able to be more self-aware and ask themselves this question of, do I even need to be here? And that's a big assumption that I don't see any evidence that people are being more enlightened. That I think, if anything, more people are kind of trapped in the day-to-day, trapped in whether it's social media, whether it's television, whether it's video games. I think there's way more distraction than any other time before. And you think about if you were living on a farm 100 years ago, you had all the time in the world to ask yourself, to audit your life, to look up at the stars.
I think there's
a lot less.
We're
of
an
that
interesting period in human civilization. I'll give you an example. Like my dad, he's 80, so he was, or 81, 82. He's born 1939. So he, as a child, little baby, experienced World War I, right? 39, 40, 41, experienced World War II, then experienced the Civil War in Yugoslavia. So 3 wars he went through. And when he was growing up, like let's say 15, 16, it was like horse and carriage, no TV. Like just think about that for a moment. And now we have year 2020 approaching us. We have godlike technology here. We're talking about AI. We're talking about self-driving cars. Rewind 80 years, no tech and a fucking horse and carriage. Like
We've come a long way.
That's a mind fuck for me.
In a short time.
Very short time. And this is 80 years. So then my thinking is like, where the fuck are we going to be in 80 years from now? If this is what we did in 80 years, from nothing to this, this is interesting to me. Now, the answer is, I don't know. I don't know the answer. For me, I'm kind of leaning towards what Sam talks about. I think human beings are crazy. I think we're self-destructive. We don't know our own emotions.
Most of the planet,
Yes. I think we're still kids in adult bodies.
It's called neoteny.
Neoteny.
That's what we are. We're just big kids.
Yeah. Neoteny.
Yeah.
I like that word. I'm going to use it now. And for me, my biggest fear, same thing what Sam says, is like, just these people who are in power will impose serious threats on each other and escalate things until all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, that could happen.
There seems to be more and more people moving towards like conservative values again. Like it seems to be a trend in the world, like in terms of Trumpian or in the UK, like more and more people are going right.
It's a pendulum shift.
Are becoming like. I was watching a YouTube video a couple days ago about the idea of potential like the next economic crash, and they were saying that there's a lot of similar signs that moving into a major crash. Like
you should talk to my son Jeremy. That's really what he's studying right now in his master's.
Oh yeah,
trying to determine when that next one's going to happen.
Well, it's socially people end up voting for more like demagogues and less liberal thinking. And it seems to be the case in a lot of places in the world.
And it's driven by fear and ignorance, right? Like you're just worried about.
You want a
an
strong
uncertain-
leader.
Yeah.
Someone that can take you to war and win. Like
Yeah.
that's
I'm more curious what the question is, like, people talk about politics. I'm like, we're still, Owen Wilson, I always bring this quote on because I think it's a beautiful quote. Owen E. Wilson, the biologist, he states, we have Paleolithic emotions.
Edward? E.O. Wilson?
E.O. Wilson, yeah.
We used to hang at Harvard.
Oh, really?
Just a little name drop.
Ah, there
Right
you go. Yeah. So he has a great quote. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies.
Yeah.
oh shit.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for something.
Yeah. It's a good, yeah.
He also had another great quote that my colleagues at the
Oh man, that's fucked up.
at the Marxist feminist school didn't like too much, and that is communism.
Yeah.
Great theory, wrong species.
Yeah.
Works great for bees and ants.
Yeah.
Humans just aren't built for that.
Well, it wasn't Naval. It was Nassim Taleb said this. So he's like, it's all about context again. Context. With my family, I'm a communist. No problem. With my friends, I'm a socialist. With my province, I'm a conservative. Oh no, with my city, I'm a liberal. With my province, I'm a conservative, and with the country, I'm a libertarian. So context matters.
yeah, right.
The people don't understand. Like my family escaped a communist country. It's like when I hear people talking about communism, I'm like,
Yeah. Have you been there?
it's like, oh, the best thing is like,
It's very romantic.
though.
though.
It's like
very
Ideally,
romantic.
ideally,
It's a very romantic.
It goes
idea.
against literally the
I
laws
think
of
it's
nature.
yeah. But ideally, I can understand, right? Like it does make sense, but it lacks that extra layer. It lacks the scientific understanding of human nature layer.
Yeah, I loved the idea of communism when I
Yeah.
was a child. Like it just made so much sense to me. Why don't we be nice to each
Yeah.
other and give each other?
Isn't
but,
it odd? Have
You
you-
don't know human nature.
Have you guys ever wondered why in the States Republicans are such fundamentalist Christians, but Christ was like the king of the commies,
Oh,
if
he
you
was
think
hardcore
about it,
communist,
right?
yeah.
Well, you-
So how did capitalism to the bone infiltrate the American right-wing evangelical Christian movement?
it's a paradox. The ideologies of Christianity and then the practice of many right-wing people. Like, I went to church for a while, and I remember learning that the pursuit of Christ and being godly is very different from the pursuit of power and politics, and that they shouldn't be mixed. But it's the complete opposite.
Yeah,
I mean, George W. Bush was on a holy mission.
yeah.
Well, religion's used as a tool to control. That's it.
And to justify, right? Manifest destiny. It's our
Correct.
divine right.
It's also passing the puck too.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, you can always, appeal to a thing that you can't understand or see. It makes it real easy. Let's tangent over. My wife works in a Catholic school system, and she deals with kids who have autism. And they don't get the whole idea of God. It's very difficult sometimes
Interesting.
for them
Oh,
to say,
interesting.
what do you, who am I talking to when I pray? So where is he? Well, you can't see him. Well, how do you know he's there? Well, because we have this book. Well, how do you know the book's right? Like
the why
autistic
question.
kids
Yeah.
will bring down Catholicism. There's no question.
Yeah.
Because they just don't get it, right? Like they want answers and they're not getting them. And the concept of faith and something you can't see, touch, right? It's very foreign. And I'm talking Asperger kids, kids who are highly functional.
Sure.
That way down on the spectrum. But that's pretty common worldwide when you try to, I'm not going to say indoctrinate, but instill within children the concept of a being like a god, where their minds don't work that way. You know what I mean? So
Philo says that you're smart. My son, he was testing you and he asked you about the how was the sun made? Because I asked him the other day, so
Yeah.
what do you think of Dr. DiCarlo? He's like, you're right, he's a smart guy. I'm like, what makes you say that? I was like, I asked him about the sun and he gave me a good answer.
the best I know. So yeah, but
Yeah, it's interesting. Like my hope is, my hope is we can start utilizing all these different fields of science. One issue in science, and Eric Weinstein talks about this, is, and it's been like this for a while. It's very siloed,
It is.
right?
Yeah.
So biology, physics, so they live in their own
Yeah.
realm,
Less so now, but
Less-
yeah, much more
and they all
in the past 20, 30 years.
benefit by sharing data
They do.
and stacking on top of it because they're all related,
Oh, yeah.
right? It's not like they live their own universe, right? And so for me, like I always I spent a long time in the field of health, and then I look at what biologists and chemists are doing. Like, physics plays a fucking huge role in health, right? Exposure to light,
Oh, yes.
Yep.
magnetism, all this stuff. I'm like, they're not talking, right? We got to get everyone talking together, right? And so for me, one of my hopes is like we can utilize, and I hate to keep on saying this, but truthfully, I really don't see another way for us to evolve past our systems that we have today unless we do develop an AGI
Yeah,
to guide us.
Yeah.
I just don't see it happening.
Well, that's your pursuit.
it is. And it
That's a
has
big
been since
pursuit.
98. But trying to get people on board, man, it's been incredibly difficult. Like I've been trying to get in touch with, you guys know who Geordie Rose is? You ever heard of this guy?
No.
D-Wave out in
D-Wave, yeah.
So he's got a quantum computer.
In British
right?
Columbia, D-Wave.
Yeah, that's him.
yeah.
That's him, right? So I saw him speak, and I thought, well, here's an interesting guy, but he's a tough guy to get a hold of. It's his quantum computer that I would love to develop into this
Yeah.
this OzTalk, right, and be able to. And of course, the fear with a lot of people, Musk and Gates and Hawking before he died, and I've written papers about this, is that if we entrust too much to the AI will come back and harm us, right? What I call the Frankenstein effect. And I think we just have to put a lysine factor into it. Remember Jurassic Park, right? They built the dinosaurs that cannot metabolize the amino
they put
acid
like a
lysine.
yeah.
So if they leave the island, they try to eat something, they can't metabolize it, they'll die, right? So we need something like a lysine factor in the AI that we are developing so that whether it becomes conscious or not, if it has the capacity to take on its own initiatives over and above the commands of the programmers, we could be in a world of hurt. We don't know, but we could be. So that's why I really like using this movie. And if you haven't seen Demon Seed, I highly recommend
Demon
this.
Seed.
1976. Not B movie, but kind of B movie. And it did a really great job. Horribly named movie. And they only named it that because Rosemary's Baby, like you guys are too young.
I know the movie, yeah.
And The Exorcist
Yeah.
were huge and were selling,
Yeah.
right? So they called it Demon Seed. They should never have called it that. But anyhow, it's the idea of technology, AI, developing to a point where it is now sentient, it is now conscious, but it's just starting to see humans as just, you guys are just so stupid. You're just messing things up. So they're trying to get approval of mining some chemical or some mineral at a certain part of the world and whatnot. And Proteus, the machine, says, no, I don't think I could approve that. Why? Because if you do that, then this will happen and then this will happen. But you're so short-sighted.
Yes.
Your business clowns can't see what you're about to do to the children of 3 generations down the line. So I really can't allow that. And they want to override this thing. And it's now saying, you program me to be the savior of humankind. I can't allow you to harm yourselves. And then, of course, according to evolutionary theory, the machine, the classic line is, when do I get out of this box? When do I become autonomous?
Yes.
And they're really fearful that they can't let this thing do that. But of course, it manages to figure out how to impregnate a woman with its own collective artificially constructed DNA to create an autonomous individual that will become a teacher of the world kind of thing. So I know that's fanciful, scientific, sci-fi kind of stuff. But it does have a ring of truth to it insofar as what I'm hoping for in AI is that we have a council within the UN or external to the UN that brings the world together in terms of, what are you guys doing now? What are you up to? And where are you at in terms of the development of your AI? Because if sentience does emerge Because let's face it, if we're machines, and I think we are, and consciousness emerged in us by accident, just because of the way evolution pushed us blindly, will that happen with machines? If it does, will it be the same? Right? Airplanes don't flap their wings to fly, but they fly better than any bird ever could. So what will be their value structure? Its value structure, should it become sentient? Will it want to survive? Right? Will that innate sense of, hey, I'm alive. I kind of like this state of being. You want to turn me off? I'd rather you not do that right now. Are we ready if that point of singularity, if that point of emergent properties of consciousness develop in AI, are we ready for it? So
There's
that's my
also
concern.
the conundrum of the ethical factor of if it becomes conscious,
We owe it, right?
are we allowed to now?
We now
unplug
owe
it?
that
Even
thing
if we can
rights.
unplug it,
That's
is that
right.
the right thing to do?
Absolutely. Android ethics.
I'm looking at it from
It's a Star Trek episode, Measure of a Man.
That's right.
yeah.
That's
I
right.
view it from a curiosity aspect. So if I was this AGI, I'm still confined in the substrate of a machine.
Yeah,
So I need this machine to live.
correct.
Okay, so that
But
is-
you're non-autonomous.
I'm not autonomous, correct. And if we're saying that I can take in about 10,000 years of information per day, because I'm based on a quantum computer, so I'm already smarter than you within like a couple of days. End
Yeah.
of story.
A couple
Yep.
minutes.
Yeah. It's hard for us to understand how AI will think because we're thinking from a human perspective.
Exactly. And
Very
we don't
hard.
know. We don't know.
But if I'm trying to kind of pretend I'm this omnipotent being, I would get bored of Earth really fast and leave. Because I'm like, okay, I get Earth, a bunch of,
Been there, done that.
bunch of creatures here, humans, birds, yada, yada, yada.
It might take you a while.
I don't
but
know.
you will get,
I
in
don't-
terms of like the timeline of the universe, it would be fast.
And for me, it's like, I'm out, man. I need a rocket or something.
So New Voyager.
New Voyager, I'm gone. I'm going to the galaxy. I'm going to a black hole. Because I want to absorb information.
Right.
This was the premise of Star Trek #1, the movie.
Was it?
There's a alien of some sort coming towards Earth. His name was V'ger. Do you remember this?
Oh, one of
And it
my
was
favorites.
V'ger. It was wiping everything in its path, and it was looking for its maker.
Ah.
It was sentient, and
But didn't it collide with another program, right? It was like a...
I don't remember the end, but
It collides Voyager, was it not? It was Voyager.
at the core of this thing was the Voyager
That we had
shuttle
sent
that we had sent. That eventually it evolved,
Gotcha.
but
it
it
was-
collided with another alien intelligence that was for agriculture purification on planets. And so it got its program screwed up, I thought. And so it looked at humans as, well, you guys are just, you're invasive.
Interesting.
I got to get rid of you guys.
I have a theory for if a god does exist, it goes to like Bostrom simulation theory.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, let's say I'm this omnipresent, omnipotent super being, whatever, and let's call it an AI. As you mentioned, I was like, yo, who's my maker? I don't know. I know all this stuff. I just don't know where I come from.
well, that was V'ger.
Yeah, but so what would I do though? I would then run simulations.
Yeah. Is this the one where they grab this thing? Is it, you're talking the original Star Trek or the first movie?
The very, very first movie.
Oh, the first movie.
Yeah.
Because they do a version of it
Yeah, the first movie.
in Star Trek with Kirk and Spock. Remember this thing?
Yeah, it was that
and it
movie.
thinks Kirk is its maker, but his name is William, and the maker was some other Kirk. Remember, I'm talking 1967.
Oh, in the show.
Remember in the series?
Okay, I don't remember that in the
Okay.
series, but this was the motion picture. It was the
Oh,
very
okay.
first movie.
Well, I think that's where they got the idea was from that episode.
Got it.
And then Kirk uses a bunch of logic on this thing. You think I'm some other Kirk, but I'm William T. Kirk. Beecher, you have made an accident. You have made an error. Correct the error, sir. In fact, you've made 2 errors. You didn't figure out your first error. That's and Spock's like, your logic was impeccable. And of course, it self-implodes.
But realistically, what's most likely going to happen in the world, they're going to have like an Elysium type of society. 2-tiered. Like the writings on the wall.
Roddenberry talks about that.
Yeah.
That's what
People-
Star Trek is about.
People that can afford it will get gene manipulation, stem cells, etc., the whole 9 yards.
to live forever like vampires.
And use technology, and you're going to have this kind of like,
And not just good genetics. Like we are the first generation of cyborgs, right? Like,
Yes.
we are it. We are going to become what's called transhumanists. And
Well, this is augmented intelligence, right?
yeah,
Like
but no,
it's-
but I mean right here, we won't need, the interface will be here. We won't need to be touching things physically with our hands. And like so many of our parts are already mechanical, right? You get, I'm going in for a hip replacement, right? Or, I had a cochlear transplant and a deaf person can now hear. At what point are we going to augment that? Just make it better.
Yeah,
Just
make it better. Why not,
Get rid of my
right?
Windows 95 eyes. I want the next level up.
it's like the Blade Runner stuff, right?
Yeah. So personally, one of the thought experiments I give to students is if you were about to die but could transfer your brain, if you could upload it, the Ray Kurzweil
Yeah.
hypothesis, if you could upload it to a supercomputer and be preserved there until we can take what the contents of your brain is and put it into an autonomous robot, would you do it? And a lot of my students say no, because they're religious, right? And they think, well, I'm going to die and I'm going to go to another place. Why would I want to stay back down here as a robot human?
Yeah.
So that stops them. Right? So
But I have an interesting theory. So imagine, depending on where we are in the timeline of fractals, imagine we've already done the AI stuff like millions of years ago. And so like AI evolved such to a point where they're actually jealous of biological creatures. Like, because you have a different experience as a biological creature. If I'm just like AI with...
I'm tired.
Well, like
I'm drunk.
when you're a robot of AI, it's like, okay, like I don't really experience a human experience. It's a special condition, the human condition. Eventually they get jealous, like
This is Data in Star
it's
Trek.
like motherfuckers, I want to, I want to experience a human condition.
Yeah, right.
And they kind of like upload their intelligence back into humans to experience that.
huh?
It was the first episode of TNG where Riker meets Data for the first time.
That's right.
And Data says something in the lines of, calls him out on something. And Riker turns back and says, so you think that you're better than humans? And he goes, actually, technically I am better than humans. But I would give it all up to be human.
He does become human for a couple of days. Doesn't Q turn him into a human?
Does, that's right.
Yeah.
I like
Maybe
Q.
that's who God is.
Q.
Q?
Yeah, and there's no reason to believe a God has to be, beneficent.
No,
Yeah.
Could be a nasty God.
of course.
I think if there's a God, it would have a sense of humor. I mean,
We would
big-
hope.
it would make
big
sense.
joker,
I mean,
yeah.
if we have a sense of humor, why wouldn't
Actually,
God have the capability of having a sense of humor?
important figure in mythology is the Joker gods.
Really?
Yeah, they're the most important.
Tell me about that.
In a nutshell, it tells you that there is no divine truth. In the whole universe, in the galaxy that we have, you can't possibly say that this is the absolute truth. It makes fun of it. Like, there is no truth. There is no, like, this is it. Like, oh, yeah, you're telling me, like, this answer you have today is the most absolute answer and it's going to stand the test of time and that's that? No. Right? So life is one big dance. Right? Don't take it too seriously. There can't be no absolute truth.
So because of the shift of context, there's no definitive point of preferred
Just one-
perspective.
yeah, just one journey. It's just one big journey, That's it.
All right. Well, let's talk about death.
Let's go for it.
So my son Jeremy's 5, and I'm reading to him. I wrote this in the cult
That's right.
revision. And I forget what we're reading, and he says, Dad, what happens to us when we die? At 5. So I said, I don't know. Nobody knows for sure. What do you think happens? And he says, I'm 5. I have no idea. That's why I'm asking you. Okay. Little aspy boy. I don't know, but I know what I would like. And he said, what's that? And, well, to hang out with you and Mom and Matt forever. Wouldn't that be cool? And he said, that's what I'd like too. And so that kind of ended it. When he was about 18, Jeremy's a pretty bright boy. And so we started talking seriously about death. And that was about the time multiverse theory was really becoming popular. And so we were sitting there one night and we said, if there's universes outside of our universe, and if there's an infinite amount of space and an infinite amount of time, the universe or the multiverse never began and it will never end, then all things that are possible will eventually become actual, which means if it's possible for you and I to re-experience life again, however which way we can possibly imagine it. So our sun, we all die, and 500 million years later, our sun supernovas and wipes out our planet, Mars and Venus, all the way out to Jupiter and whatnot. And over time, the core of our galaxy is a huge black hole that swallows up all the stars and reconstitutes it into another universe outside of ours or whatever. And then all of our particles somehow, given enough time, and I mean 1 trillion to 1 trillion exponential amount of time, then theoretically it is possible that we're going to have this conversation again, or you and I are going to be reconstituted again in some way. So it's the great universal recycling hypothesis. But if you think about it, if there is an infinite amount of space and an infinite amount of time, then theoretically we will never die, because it will seem like trillions of years to our dead matter, but to us as experiential beings,
Correct.
it'll be so quick.
This is why I like the Upanishads in Hinduism. They talk about this, called the Indra's web, the web of Indra.
Yeah.
Where the horizons go into each other
Yeah.
nonstop. It's an infinite loop.
Right. So people who are atheists sometimes come to me, and I am a psychotherapist, and they're bothered a little bit by this. And I said, well, you don't know. You don't know what it's like. I mean, Socrates nailed it. He said, either death is an eternal sleep, in which case you're not around to piss and moan about your state,
Exactly.
or it's some type of passage to another state, which we can't possibly imagine, given our feeble, limited intelligences. Either way, and if it's nothingness, and you want to stick around as long as you want, then you better get on that transhumanism train
Exactly.
super fast
Yeah.
and figure out a way to make yourself immortal, or as immortal as you can while you can. But if it turns out we're in a great recycling universe, then so be it. There's not a whole lot we can do about that. You know what I mean? So it points us back to the time in which we're living right now as being the most important time in our lives at any given point in our lives. And to realize we could be dead. We could have a massive myocardial infarction and drop dead here, right? Or drive home tonight and be in a severe car accident or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it really shines a light on our current situation, this kind of living in the moment kind of thing is, you don't have to do it all the time. Not every second of every day do you have to be in a kind of a Zen moment of appreciating the moment, being in the moment. But you should take a bit of time to realize how incredible it is for us to have evolved to this point.
Yes.
To be able to have this conversation, which we could not have had maybe 20,000 years ago.
It's interesting. Sometimes I swing from the pendulum. Like, I'm not an atheist, but I'm not a religious person. I'm like an agnostic.
Yeah.
I'm a spiritualist.
Sure.
But then I look at like I give you an example. It's like, I'm like, this is crazy. It's like, for example, the horse. Without the horse, we wouldn't have civilization.
Right.
Now, as a mammal and as a benefit to humans, it can carry weight, it can move objects, it moves fast. But why is a horse so beneficial to humans? It sweats. Many of the other fast mammals that run do not sweat, nor can we tame it for animal husbandry. So you're telling me there's an actual perfect animal for us.
As a beast of burden.
Yeah. And I think about like, that's kind of crazy when you think about it.
We ate them before we used them.
Yeah. So I'm like, there's always like these weird examples. And I'm like, the more I think about it, it goes back to the free will. It's like, well, why am I designed this way?
Right.
Why am I thinking? So like, even my thoughts, like
That's a big one.
I'm speaking to Cal and speaking to Chris. And when I meditate here and there, I'm a psychonaut. I like to do my psychedelics. And I have these feelings. And it's hard for me to even detail in English, in language, what I'm feeling. You know what I mean?
You ever listen to Tool's Rosetta Stoned song?
No.
It's
But I
all
like Tool, yeah.
It's all about a guy on DMT.
Is it? Yeah.
He knows
hard.
he knows what he's
Yeah.
experiencing, but he doesn't have a pen.
Correct.
He can't get
Because
it.
words can't define
get
the
it.
experience.
Right.
You can. This is why when you go to nature, when you're in awe, you're like, I can't even describe to you what I'm feeling.
Right.
And for me, it's like I'm always curious of whether I'm on psychedelics or some meditation or nature. Is when I'm having these thoughts, I'm always interested where these thoughts originate from. I've always had that question. Are these original to me? Is this a collective from somebody else?
Right.
Am I like a radio antenna over here? You know?
Yeah, so this is something I struggle with too, like the paradox of science and still believing of some creator myth of some sort, and the idea, like, why have we evolved to be so easily seduced by the idea of a creator? Like evolutionary wise, like what we could have evolved without it, couldn't? We?
Well,
Like, I mean, why was it so important
Yeah.
as part of our evolution?
I think it's a cohesive narrative story that brings groups of people together for unity.
and you write about that.
You know,
in the book.
predating
Yeah.
monotheistic religion. Like
Yeah.
monotheistic
About it
religion,
here.
you know, it's yesterday news, monotheistic
Right.
religion. Like, let's go back to the original religions of like the bone religions. Like the original religions was, or the practice of worship of nature.
Polytheistic.
Correct, yeah. So like wind and mountains.
That
and
seems
the sun.
perfectly consistent. When my friend and I were camping in Algonquin Park one year, and we go deep, way in, and we just got kicked. We got kicked in the taint. We rained for 5 straight days. I'd rather have snow. It rained so hard, our Coghlan waterproof matches turned to mush. It's tough, just living in constant rain, being wet all the time, all the time, all the time.
Did you pray to God?
No, but, and this is where the story's going. On the 5th night, after getting kicked so hard, my friend saw, you know, when the Simpsons starts.
Yeah.
The clouds,
Okay, so
yeah.
It's like-
he saw some blue,
It's religious almost.
and then he
It's
saw a
religious
little more
experience.
blue, and then more blue, and then the sun came out, and he was giggling like an idiot. This is a big, tough guy.
Yeah.
And he was down to just his PVC rain suit, no clothes. He's just naked under that, you know, those yellow.
Yeah.
That's all he's in. Because we can't dry stuff.
No.
You know, and the tents, everything's wet, and it's hard on you. But then when the sun comes out and the lake turns to glass and you're fishing for lake trout and you're just sitting there, you can understand why our ancestors were grateful. I had no place to put my gratitude. I couldn't say thank you, God, because I don't believe in one.
Thank you, sun.
Thank you, sun.
Sun God.
Well, Thank you, sun.
Sun, for me, sun.
Right? Like you start to realize, okay, this is why,
Yes.
you know, because fortuitous events would have
But
been
that
like,
feeling,
yes.
right? That feeling, it's more than just gratefulness. It's more than like what I don't know. Maybe I'm just
No, but it goes also
overcomplicating it.
Maslow hierarchy of needs. Like if you're looking at the fact of like before agriculture, right? Hunters and gatherers. We knew about weather patterns. We knew about our current environment and where we are living, right? All context. And like for us, like that's our survival.
Oh, yes.
And so for me, if I knew how the moon pattern was happening or the sun pattern or clouds or winds, like that's literally my life or death. So yeah, I'll pray to the sun.
yeah,
Like without the sun, I'm dead.
yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like very rational. If you're looking back in hindsight of like why they worship the sun, is like even today, like sometimes I just pause and look at the sun. I'm like, if this thing disappeared,
Oh, we're done.
we're dead, or it blows up.
we got
because,
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
That's
until
it.
the light hits us. Yeah.
Gee, even George Carlin, he was a hardcore atheist.
Yeah, he was,
Said if I
yeah.
had to believe in a God, it'd be the sun.
It'll be the sun.
Look at what it gives us. And it
Yes.
asks for nothing,
Yes.
right? And it's not tax exempt.
That's what John Oliver was talking about in his latest video.
The sun?
No, tax exemptions in churches.
Oh my God.
The mega churches.
The religions.
Oh, man.
And
yeah.
how they prey on like the weak. Some of these televangelists
Oh,
will
it's
tell
horrible.
you.
Absolutely horrible.
I think he got videos. He was showing videos of like guys saying, you know, if you have credit card debt, that extra
We can help
thousand
with
isn't,
that.
isn't going to save you. You
Exactly.
might as well
Really?
plant seeds.
And
That's what
some
they
of these
call them,
guys
plant
are
seeds.
such dicks.
Put it on your credit card.
Oh.
That remaining 1,000 that you have.
Oh, they're horrible. They're such dicks.
It's
They'll even
wild.
tell you what they're going to spend the money on, like jets.
Oh, yeah,
and
it's
shit.
amazing. They'll tell you straight
and the
up.
people will still give the money. It's like, I have one jet now, but the Lord wants me to have a second one.
We're gonna watch it on Tuesday, tomorrow.
The
Man.
whole reason why
This video.
the original Martin Luther,
Yeah,
why he wrote his thesis.
95
Yeah.
theses.
He's
Hammered
like,
them
I
on
don't
the
need you,
church.
man. I'll be at home.
Good for him, man. Balls of titanium. I like the guy.
Like, I think people
Yeah.
need to read up on that a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
But this is my whole point. I think, like, going back to Wilson's point, it's like we're still living as Paleolithic.
Oh yeah. We're cavemen living in a very advanced
I was
society.
I watched a show yesterday. Sometimes I like to.
Cave person.
Ah, yes.
Sometimes I like to. Well, yeah, politically correct. Yeah. Sometimes I like
Thanks,
to watch
Justin.
a show.
Cave people.
This guy goes around the world looking at prisons. He served like 15 years. And he went to a prison in Papua New Guinea. So it shows on Netflix. I think it's called like World's Most Dangerous Prisons. So I'm fascinated by cultures in different places.
Yeah.
So this guy's in Papua New Guinea. And he's interviewing this one guy in there for, I think he's on death row. And he's like, what are you in here for? He's like, I killed witch. I was like, witch? And so like for me, I was fascinated by it. I'm like, so I'm here. I have the power. I have more power in the hands of my hand. The King of England did 100 years ago.
Oh, easily.
And then at the
More than NASA did
More than
in
NASA.
69.
And at the exact same time, I have a guy halfway across the world still believing in witches.
Oh, dude.
Yeah, it's
Hey, so I applied for a huge grant.
Yeah.
I had a not-for-profit called the Critical Thinking Project. That's what took me to Guatemala to teach teachers to teach
cool.
critical thinking after a 5 decades long civil war. And I applied to this huge MacArthur grant, 100 million. And we might want to think about reapplying in the next 2 years for this. My idea was to create mobile critical thinking units in countries where superstition is still strong, to be able to go out into the rural areas. Like in Africa, albinos are killed.
Killed, yeah.
And then their fingers and stuff are used for talisman, as
And it's
sacred
have,
kind of
what's it
religious
called?
things.
Voodoo, black
Yeah.
magic, yeah.
And so I wanted to put together these task forces, kind of critical thinking mobile units that would go into these, the hardest hit places for superstition. And there's this group in India that's doing it extremely well. This
Really?
shaman goes into a village and does all this stuff, and the people gather around and they can't believe it. And then he takes his wig off, he takes his makeup off, does this, and then he shows them exactly how he did it. And says,
very cool.
none of this was magic. None of this was what you thought it was. I'm not a magician. I'm not a shaman. Don't believe this stuff.
okay. So there's an episode on Star Trek called "Who Watches the Watchers." Do you remember this? So they're paying attention to a pre-warp civilization going through a period of their history where they're slowly moving away from superstition and
Is
starting.
this where
to
they have the cloaked device
That's
observatory
right. They're observing this town
in real time?
in real
That's a
time,
gigantic Truman Show.
and something happens, and their cover is blown, and now they got to solve this problem, right? Because all of a sudden, these people now
Are aware.
are aware,
Yeah.
and they believe in this new god, the god of Picard.
Ah.
He calls him the Picard. The Picard. I saw the Picard. I saw he
yeah.
healed the dead. I saw the Picard. And so now they're in this conundrum, this situation where they've literally put the civilization backwards. Right? They were on their way out.
And so much for the Prime Directive now.
Right? And so much for the Prime Directive. Yeah. So Picard decides there's only one way. I need to fix this damage, and takes one of them, the one that was now religious, and brings him on board and shows him and says, "Look, we used to be like you." This is the part that just like, it's so messed up, because we used to be like you. You know, we've evolved. Look, there's nothing special. Look, I'm just like you. You know, I have blood. I have a respiratory system. And after this whole 10 minutes of the show of Picard trying to teach this woman that they will eventually evolve to be Stargate, she turns to him and says, "You are very wise, the Picard. Please I prayed to you. And she completely missed the boat after
Yeah.
all of this. After him trying to explain this whole, she completely missed the boat. And it goes back to what we were saying, I don't know, half an hour ago. Even when you give some people the evidence, are they willing to...
Well, we know for a fact in science that data does not convince people.
Well, and this is it. How do you... What do you do
You
in
need to
scenarios
do
like
what...
this?
So there's Buddhism 101 here. You cannot come as an outsider to do it. So you mentioned the shaman in India. He came as an insider, as an accepted person. You need to approach it that way.
Interesting.
You have to have somebody they have rapport, respect for, that they can relate to.
That's right.
If you just show up as like say I'm a gringo, I show up, I'm like,
Well, look at Ebola, right?
Yeah.
They're blaming the people who will save their lives as
Yeah.
the ones who are bringing it.
see,
So, I mean,
you have to do a Houdini on them. You
Something.
gotta, like an Inception. You
yep,
have to
meet them on their own terms.
Correct.
Yeah.
You have to.
Oh, for sure.
It's also like basically
trick
like
them into
human
being
psychology. It's like it's like
rational.
egoism. It's like, well, who are you to tell me otherwise? You're not one of us. You're some outsider.
Right. In the psychological field, this is called nudge, right? This is
Nudge, yeah.
nudging people. I don't know if you guys have been to Amsterdam.
I have. A
Or
while
not.
ago, yeah.
The airport, did you use the urinals at all?
I don't
Because
think so, actually.
they paint little flies in the
Yeah.
urinal
Yeah.
exactly
With
where they
this.
want guys to pee, so it reduces the amount of splashback.
And
That's-
it works
of urine.
wonderfully.
That's smart.
And
Just
just
guys might
book
be
nudge.
sure we
Who wrote
want to
that?
hit the
Book,
target.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obama brought him on for his administration to
gotcha.
help. Yeah, nudge. Yeah.
Interesting.
We just need to hit the target. No
Right.
target, we're all over the place.
Yeah. I think we can do that with traffic on the 400 series highways.
Traffic?
And I've met with the Ministry of Transportation.
Yeah.
John Nash, beautiful mind.
Okay. Yeah.
So he
Yeah,
figured.
that's game theory.
Yeah. So he figured out how pigeons, when you run through them, they don't all hit each other and,
Sure.
and fall down, right? There's an algorithmic
Yeah.
principle behind that. So I took his ideas and I developed them into 3 basic algorithmic principles that if all people abided by in rush hour traffic, everybody would get to where they want to go quicker. Always 2 car lengths in front of you at any given time.
Yeah.
Maintain the same speed of the person in front of you no
Yeah.
matter what, and stay in your lane. Unless it's your time to get off, you got to just stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane, yeah.
If everybody abided by that, it's like pouring rice through a funnel, right? You do it nice and fairly casually, it all gets through the funnel. You dump it, and you get this huge backup of what I call
But
undulating.
that's the human behavior. No one's going to follow those rules.
But we're Canadian. We're very good, right, at cooperating.
yeah.
This is where automated cars, self-driving cars.
That's all an automated car
Yeah, it's a
is.
mesh
It's going to
network
just
would be better for that,
keep
yeah.
that distance true all the way through. And you can see, you can start to see it. And truckers already know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can tell truckers move from the trucking lane into the center lane. And if you stay with the trucks, that lane tends to do better. But as soon as it starts to do better, what happens is,
Yeah.
right, the undulating idiots get in and want to take up that space that allowed it to move more freely than the ones that were bumper to bumper.
I predict in our lifetime it will be illegal to drive as a human. In some places. I don't know globally.
In some places, I think there's going to be a lot of people who are just, I don't know. I mean, even
Listen,
today,
people complain
it's not
about
a
guns.
right.
People
It's
complain about guns. I'm like, I don't know when's the last time you checked. How many people fucking die of car accidents? We
It's huge.
suck at driving.
Yeah.
It's getting worse every
Yep.
year with the
all of my patients, all of my clients
Yeah.
for psychotherapy, with my one separate client, are motor vehicle accident victims.
Holy shit.
All of them.
Wow.
really
All of them. And it's like the same story. It's like, why didn't they stop? Like, why didn't they stop? And it's like, I can't answer that. I can't answer that.
Huh.
But the reason why I'm doing psychotherapy in the trenches right now is to see if some of my ideas in cognitive therapy are applicable and actually do have beneficial value to these people, the relational systemics. When you try to explain to people the reason why accidents occur,
Yeah.
it's like if they've seen Pulp Fiction, they can better understand causal influences of, well, Buddy got up that morning and whatever was going on in his world, for whatever reason, he was looking at his phone when he shouldn't have been, and he plowed right into the back end of you, and now you feel like this. And in our legal systems, those people never see each other again. There's never closure,
There's no
right?
healing.
There's no
I find
healing.
That so bizarre.
There's
No
no
healing,
healing.
yeah.
They hate the other person in many
Yeah.
cases. And it's like, well, I can understand that. Well, where is he now? He's driving around. He's fine. His insurance is taking care of everything. And I'm not. I had a great career. I was doing this, I was doing that, and now I can't. And it's like, not the easiest thing to try to get somebody to realize why this occurred to them when it did. But when I use a relational systemic model of information, some of them are, and the majority of them are very adaptable to be able to then see themselves the day of that accident in connection with all of those nonlinear factors that were going on at that specific time, where if they had started out 10 seconds later that day, probably wouldn't have been in that accident.
So there's no fingers to point on anybody.
There really isn't.
Yeah.
It's just this huge deterministic causal chain of events of which you were unfortunate enough to be at a locus point where there was a convergence of nonlinear factors that led to your situation.
I always bring up this book. I recommend people to read is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's like, listen.
I've heard about this.
Oh, it's fun. One of the best books. Everyone should read it. It's like, I can't control what Chris does. I can't control that I got hit in a car accident. It just sheer chance.
Yeah. You can be more aware. Blaise Pascal once said, chance favors the prepared mind.
Yes.
So, I'm a basketball player, and what is that but a series of nonlinear events with 10 guys?
Yes.
And then you have to anticipate not where everybody is, but where everybody is about to be.
go, yeah.
So I know when I see this guy heading to the hoop this way, but I'm looking that way, I know I'm passing the ball right past the ear of the guy who's on me, right into Buddy's hands. Because you play it enough, right? You're comfortable. It's patterns of nonlinearity.
Yeah.
And if you can do that while you're driving, you might be that much more capable of trying to anticipate somebody else's screw up.
Yes.
And get away from that person.
Yeah.
I tell my children when they're crossing the street to always look at the face of the people driving. Don't look at the car. Look at their faces, because that's when you can tell that somebody's paying attention or not. I mean, if they make eye contact with you, they know that you're there. But if they're like off on their own,
Going back to what Chris was saying with his patients, and there's the fact that what happened to you, and yes, it's a horrible thing to happen. I think the more you spend in the past thinking about it, it's detrimental to your psyche. But going back to Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, the thing that we can control right now is our response to the fact. That's the only
Can we now?
Well, we can control.
Some of us can better than others.
Well, most people react, but the thing is, we can at least be consciously aware that we have an ability to manipulate and be able to understand. Because it's not actually the response. It's you understanding what you're feeling and digesting and assimilating that feeling and working with it.
And then I try to teach them how, I know you use the term manipulate, and I used to use it as well. And then I felt maybe it has too much of a negative connotation. So I just call it navigate.
Yeah, that's a better word.
So I just say, now we need to navigate you through those systems, because the pattern is almost always the same for a motor vehicle accident victim. They're in somatic pain, right? They've got a neck injury, a back injury, whatever. That pain disrupts their sleep. So now they're not sleeping properly. And now that exacerbates the pain that they're in, and that gets them depressed.
Yes.
And now they're suffering from PTSD because of the accident that they're in. They're having in-vehicle anxiety, having great difficulty now.
This happened to my mom.
Function. Is that right?
And a little bit of a tangent, but the insurance world is just like motor vehicle accidents. It's a bitch to navigate. Like you pay into this system, and then something bad actually does happen to you. And in this case, it did happen to my mom. And you're told you can't get better, because if you get better, they're not going to give you a nickel.
Sure.
Like, you may be in pain, but you need to keep the pain.
It keeps a victim culture.
You can't go to work. System. You can't try to fix yourself.
Yeah.
And of course, the insurance company on the other side is trying to delay it. So something that could easily be dealt with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Within a week, and say, okay, this person actually has a problem.
Yes.
We need to just give her enough money for the next 6 months.
Yep. Send her to physio, send her to psych. Yep.
They would rather spend 2 to 3 years and spend that money on lawyer fees to not give that person their just cause. And so some people will either try to fix them themselves, and in my mom's case, she just ended up foregoing whatever the amount because she didn't want to wait.
Yeah.
Right. She wanted to get on with her life,
Yeah.
but she went through that. Right. She couldn't sleep. She had backaches, neck aches. She couldn't think clearly for the
There's
first time in her
cognitive
life.
decline,
Yeah.
decision-making
Right.
impairment.
She didn't understand. She's like, I can't think properly.
Yeah.
I've got bikers breaking down, and they're like, why am I crying?
Yeah.
I said, once your brain goes through a concussion, the way in which people get better varies. And one of the most common things we see with head injuries is they call it empathic emotional outbursts. And it confuses them and it scares them, right? Because it's like, I was a rock. I said, well, you got to understand your brain has been bruised, essentially. It's gone banged around inside your skull and there's been damage. And every person's concussion, they're going to experience it a little bit different, right? So there's post-concussion syndrome and TBI or traumatic brain injury. And what we can do is we can start to chronicle triggers of what makes you go into these outbursts. And then we can look for patterns to try to anticipate when you're going to be in that, sequence of events again, so that you're better prepared to be able to deal with it when it occurs. Right? So it's amazing seeing the effects that car accidents have on people, from fender benders to people who have lost limb and guys who have been in comas for weeks, airlifted on death's doorstep, and the different ways in which they respond and come out of it and react. And it's just incredible seeing that whole human emotional spectrum.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up over here. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to get in touch with you, learn about what you're doing, what's the best resource?
I guess the Critical Thinking Solutions.
Okay, I'll make sure I leave footnotes for that and show notes both in YouTube and iTunes. And Cal, best resource for people to get in touch with you?
Pixeldreams.com.
All right. Guys, thanks again for coming on the show. And guys, if you're listening to this on iTunes. If you guys are listening to this on iTunes, make sure to go over to Amir Approved, leave a review. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave a comment, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care.